Hi there, folks. This is Tom, and you are listening to the Heavily Biased Top 10, Season 2025, Episode 2 The Sky Isn't Falling Yet. We got 2 weeks in. These are two great weeks of college football. And while we started off with some really strong games, we got exactly what we expect out of week 2, which is to say that most conferences played non conference and non confrontational. A lot of games between Power 4 and G5, or between Power 4 and, in some cases, teams from for teams from FCS. And so what we're seeing right here is a lot of tune-up uh, with a few high data points sprinkled in. Um, there's a lot to love about seeing some of those big games early, but there's also a lot of criticism for not seeing some of those big games out of teams that have high expectations. Um, what have we learned so far? Well, at the beginning of the season, I told you that Boise State was the G5 team to beat until something else happened. And what we saw in week 1 was something else happened. USF pulled off the upset and then followed that with a week 2 trip to Gainesville and beat Florida. So there's no longer a clear leader for that G5 spot. Why is USF not the clear leader? Well, they are in some cases, but they also have a game coming up against Miami and will play Florida State through the remainder of the year. USF definitely has the chance to pad their resume from the G5 spot in a way that nobody else does. However, it's still a G5 school. They still are going to play their conference. They still have a good chance to struggle into some of those games. And if they do so, you might see Boise State slip back in. Why would you see them slip back in? Because Boise State this week also is going to, or is it this week? Yeah, coming up on their schedule, also has Notre Dame. And so we will see Boise State with an opportunity to play a big name school and to get one of these big wins under their belt as well. This is easily, they're not the same conference, and this could very easily be a different conference and a different champion. You are still going to have a conference championship attached to yourself as a G5 in order to secure that spot. And so that said, there's still the opportunity for somebody like Boise to slip back in. First-year quarterbacks may still play like first-year quarterbacks. Doesn't matter what their name is. Doesn't matter how many years on campus. Doesn't matter their pedigreed. It's a different thing being the guy. I said in the undefeated edition, I have said for years in other editions that were written, and you're going to hear it from me again, I don't like preseason rankings. For the same reasons, I don't like preseason Heisman hype. Yeah, you can have a huge year coming in and a big campaign, but unless you are a proven commodity who is coming back for something that we expect to be in a similar offense, playing similar football, and getting a good opportunity to kind of continue, there's really not a lot of sense to it. The preseason rankings, same thing. Every year's team is different. You are looking at different competition. You're looking at different play, and it's just not going to be the same thing. Yeah, we'll know in a few weeks which people are kind of in the running, but very much like my rankings, I expect that to be, around week 6 before we have any idea. Number 3 is that most teams are a work in progress. The big names and the big games dominate headlines, but being the most complete team that you see in week 1 does not always translate to being the best team down the stretch. We're going to look at some examples of that one, some capsules of kind of where some teams have gone. All of the ones that are coming up are teams that lost big games in week 1. I left Notre Dame off of that list because I feel like we have a lot to learn about them before we really get into it. And, they don't have a conference to play in, so it's a little bit harder to gauge some of what they do. Let's go ahead and dive into those. Starting off with Clemson. This is a projected ACC competitor, and the ACC being a conference that we expect a little bit lighter in competition. Clemson is 1-1 through 2 home games. I will grant you and anybody who asks that Troy and LSU are not equals, but what we've seen out of Clemson so far, we do see some progression, between their opening loss to LSU, in which they played a very strong game, and their win against Troy, in which I would argue they played much worse. Uh, there's a 14-minute time of possession gap against LSU. Clemson was down by almost 14 minutes in time of possession, which is hard to win a game, and still pushed that game down to a one score. That trimmed to just 6 minutes against Troy. Granted, Troy did score scored a touchdown off their defense. Penalties for Clemson got cut in half from 6 to 3, so penalties have not been their problem. Takeaways, opportunistic defense continues to be the key. The fact that they were able to hold both of these teams relatively in check. Even though Troy jumped out to a 16-0 lead, they were unable to do anything past that. And so Clemson was able to kind of finally right the ship and get past them with I won't call it a big win, but get past them with a win. What do we see building out of this team? Well, here's a team that returned as many players as really anybody in the country, and did so off of a playoff run where they won the ACC. So you would expect high things out of them. They returned a veteran quarterback. They returned a good number of their receivers. They returned a large portion of their defensive personnel. And the defensive personnel have kind of carried the day so far. The offense definitely has not gone up to what I would call par, especially when you consider things like time of possession. They will face a Georgia Tech team this weekend to open their ACC season, and that is going to be a real challenge. Georgia Tech, we know, is a team that is built traditionally around holding on to the football, around a run-centric offense. Georgia Tech loves to get out there, pound the football, shorten the game, and shorten the number of possessions. And if Clemson do not jump out to something early, they could very easily find themselves on the back end of something coming out of Atlanta. Texas. Wrong end of a 14-7 score at Ohio State. And that leaves us with a lot of questions. There was a lot of things in media. Why I said, Arch Manning had all the hype. He's got the Manning name. Can he live up to that? 14-7 sure doesn't feel like it. Is he what we expect from a Manning? Well, he's different. He's not Peyton. He's not Eli. He is himself. He's more than a decade removed from the last time that we saw Manning in the SEC. He's nearly a decade removed from when we saw Peyton in the NFL. It's been a while, and you have to kind of wonder what's happening with him. Is he the fit that we thought he was? Is he the fit for Sarkisian's offense? Or is this just kind of an anomaly that they played an Ohio State team that happens to also be really, really good? Now, is that the best of the SEC? That's another decent question that comes up with this, to try and figure out if we are seeing what we expect out of a playoff team playing what amounts to their second consecutive game against Ohio State, falling short in their second consecutive game against Ohio State, and really not looking great week one. Week two started off kind of slow. 2 punts back to back. If you're Texas, you're not looking at this and you're thinking things are hopeful. You're looking at this and wondering what's going on. 4 straight touchdown drives really erase any doubt, but this is against much lesser competition. 2 more tune-ups, and then they jump into conference play, but they don't jump into conference play soft. This is a team that, unlike last year where they got a pretty soft ride through the SEC, is going to have a little bit better competition this season. So, buckle up. Alabama. That was a disaster against Florida State. There's really no way to sugarcoat that. You come down, you get your opening possession touchdown, and then afterwards, where's the fire? There's there were lapses on defense, there were lapses on offense, there were key penalties, there were a lot of different things that did not look like a well-disciplined and well-prepared team. They did what they needed to do. They kind of circled their wagons. They got everything put together. They ignored everything that was outside of the room, and you couldn't have looked more perfect in a game. This is a team that went out and their quarterbacks, which they intended to rotate, scripted. That was their plan, was to play both quarterbacks, their one and their two, in the first half. Those two quarterbacks went 20 for 20. I've practiced a lot of football, and I know that if you are running scripted plays against the air, 20 for 20 can still be difficult. Throws go behind people, throws go high, throws get dropped. No, 20 for 20 in the first half. Speaking of quarterbacks, 3 of them played in this game. 2 of them we expected in the first half. The third is their big freshman prospect who came in. All 3 quarterbacks threw for 2+ touchdowns. 69 plays, 73 points. They allowed only 50 and 9 first downs. ULM had just a handful of plays even in Alabama territory. Got a couple of key takeaways, really, really changed how they played the game. Once again, lesser competition. But, this was easily the biggest week 1 to week 2 growth of the teams that went out and played major games week 1. Wisconsin's going to be a different challenge, and it's also going to be the second Power 4 opponent that is on their schedule. It's the final Power 4 non-conference opponent that's on their schedule, but it's the second one. And then a bye before another road trip to Georgia. So, this team could be, who knows? What do you expect out of this? Well, in preseason, I told you Alabama's one of the teams that I'm watching and expecting things from out of the SEC, because I feel like Tennessee's on a little bit of a downturn. Or from what they had last year, they had a few transfers away, including their quarterback and some receivers. They have some other things that are there going on that I didn't feel was quite as strong. I thought that Georgia and Texas and LSU are really kind of the 3 at the top, with Alabama and South Carolina making up that next pair with Tennessee in the same mix. But again, we'll know real quick because that Georgia game comes up fast. That this is a team that could be 2-2, that could be 1-3, could be 3-1, and you're looking at Florida State as a blip on their radar. But there's a lot to see about how these teams expand, how they play, and how they grow from week to week. We're 1/6 of the way through the regular season in the blink of an eye. And before too long, we're going to look at this again and evaluate where teams are 4 games in. It's going to be real quick that we come up on our first actual ranking when we've got 6 data points for most of these teams. And by then, we're going to see quite a bit more of what's there. I've got a couple things that are off the slide that I'm going to talk about real quickly. Number one, when you take a look at kind of how these conferences did, and we're going to go to conference rankings next. If you look at a conference schedule from week to week, and you find these weeks where a 16-team conference plays 15 games, and you're looking at one conference game in there, and you're looking at a bunch of also-rans. We do hope that we see weeks where some of your big names and some of your others are out there and playing Power 4 opponents, that they're getting these big non-conference games scheduled. And down the stretch, is it going to matter what your top end did against the other conference's top end? Yes, absolutely. But it also matters what your middle and what your bottom end did against their kind of same station opponents. And so in that, I'm going to say big props here to Mississippi State, who got a big lead, fought back, had Arizona State, a defending playoff team and conference champion, fought their way back into a game, and then Mississippi State broke it right back open. And so we had an opportunity to see another of these SEC teams take on what is expected to be the top of the Big 12, and Mississippi State came away with a win. All right, conference rankings. Last week I had a tie between SEC and Big Ten. This week I've got back to just a little bit of separation. SEC is number 1 with 3.6 projected playoff spots. Lackluster week 1. Yeah, you had a big win out of LSU. You had one upset loss out of Alabama. You had a 50-50 game out of Texas and Ohio State. This week the SEC posted a 13-1 non-conference mark, including a win in the middle of the conference when we say OU and Michigan, and a win from the bottom end of the conference where we had a big win from Mississippi State over Arizona State. Vandy also won a big non-conference game, taking down Virginia Tech. So you had several that did go and play some of these Power 4 non-conference games. The only non-conference loss was, as we said, USF, who came in and beat Florida. The Big Ten dropped off just a little bit to 3.4. And let's be very clear here. The top end of this conference is on cruise control. Unless something disastrous happens, barring just a collapse, we're going to see Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon all make it through to playoff spots. The middle of their conference is where you need teams like Michigan or Indiana or Illinois or somebody similar to have good pushes to get to that 4th spot. And in part, that's because of the lack of Big 12 or Big 10 teams playing Power 4 non-conference schedules. There's just not that many opportunities for them to go out and win those big games. Yes, Ohio State over Texas, big win. But down the stretch, when you look at it, if the Big 10 is in a position where they are behind the SEC the rest of the way, where they're even with the Big 12 the rest of the way, you're going to have problems with putting them in on a 4th spot. The ACC. Strong showing on opening weekend was backed with a collapse this past weekend. They lost almost every major game as far as their non-conference power games go. And this conference is a lollipop. This conference has a big giant head and a stick below it. Baylor taking down SMU. You had Vandy and West Virginia, where West Virginia is probably expected to win that game, and Vandy blew them open. Troy has no business hanging with Clemson in just what your expectations are of this game. And sure enough, they led that game for a considerable amount of time. Big 12, I've got at 1.4 spots. There's still the stronger possibility that they are going to be the one that picks up an extra. And right now I have them picking up that extra if Notre Dame is not in. Notre Dame still got a whale of a schedule. They're going to come up. They've got Boise State on their schedule. They've got Texas A&M still on their schedule. They have several big games, somewhat more to their credit than I usually give. G5 is always going to be at 1. There's not really anything you're going to do to max that out and push them a second spot. But Notre Dame, as I said, we're at 0.2 right now, about a 25% chance or so that they get a spot versus don't. They don't have a conference championship game to go and win. And so that last data point for them happens at the end of their regular season. For all the hype that they have on their schedule this year, 9-3 just isn't going to cut it. So that's where we are for this week. We've got a couple of games coming up, but look for the primer on the website. We will leave a link to the notes version of this in the description. But man, we're 1/6 of the way through the season already. Time flies too much in college football. We'll see you next week.